joining us now. NBC's Aaron Gilchrist, live from the White House. NBC's Brian Cheung, also with us, and former Republican Governor John Kasich from Ohio. He is an MSNBC political analyst. So, Brian, what are the impact of these tariffs on the U.S.?
Yeah, and I think it's really helpful that you already outlined kind of what China has done as retaliatory action in response to the United States putting that 10% tariff in February and then an additional 10% on them last week. What we're talking about here are a lot of agricultural products. As you outlined, 15% tariffs on chicken, wheat, corn, 10% on soybeans, pork, beef, and fruit. These are the types of things that in the heartland of America, agricultural producers are making. And this is a very different conversation than we were having last week when we were talking about those prospective 25% tariffs, which in part were exempted for at least a month, where you're talking about types of companies that import things from Mexico and Canada that would have faced the 25% tariff. What we are talking about today with these retaliatory tariffs that took effect as of Monday is any sort of agricultural producer that then ships off to another country, like, for example, China, because this is the country that's doing the retaliatory action here. This is a really big deal when you consider that, yes, on Wall Street, certainly here in Manhattan, right downtown, a lot of people watching that, but it's really these agricultural product producers like soybeans, which are a major export to China, that are going to feel the pinch of these tariffs that took effect as of today. Wall Street reacting negatively, not just off of these initial tariffs, but of course of the concern that this tariff war is going to ratchet up, that the a temporary stay that we got for the 1 month on Mexico and Canada is just going to be revisited a few weeks from now. And then, of course, those reciprocal tariffs which the Trump administration has been touting on any country around the world, which will likely take effect on April 2nd, according to the White House, Jose.
Aaron, what's the reaction this morning from the White House?
Well, Jose, I think really the reaction from the White House is to lean in, both in action and in rhetoric. We know, as Brian mentioned, we're going to start to see more tariffs going into effect. Tariffs on steel and aluminum, we expect to see those on Wednesday of this week. And then on April 2nd, we have those reciprocal tariffs that the president telegraphed a few weeks back, saying that the administration is going to be looking at its trade relationships with every single country around the world and making sure it institutes tariffs reciprocally against all of those different countries. There have been leaders who've reached out to the White House, who've reached out to the president to say, hey, let's take a really careful look at this and try to come up with a plan that won't hurt either country. At the same time, we saw President Trump on Air Force One last night. You can see some of the footage there, answering a few questions. And he was asked about these tariffs that we are already seeing in place, the retaliatory tariffs that we're seeing in place now as well, and what might happen going forward. Listen to the president's response.
I think the tariffs are going to be the greatest thing we've ever done as a country. It's going to make our country rich again. We're basically going to take back the money, a lot of the money that we've given away over many decades. We've lost our jobs. We've lost our factories. We've lost 90,000 factories since the beginning of NAFTA. It's not that long ago. 90,000 factories. Think of that. And we're going to get them back.
And so I think some of the uncertainty out there comes from some mixed messaging. The president has said that it's potentially a possibility that tariffs might go up in some cases, higher than what he's indicated so far. But then you heard the Commerce Secretary say over the weekend that as they look at some of these interactions on trade, that the tariffs could be adjusted. You might see some of them come down. Whatever the case may be from the Trump administration, Jose, we know other countries, Canada, for example, have said they're digging in for the long haul here. They anticipate the current prime minister said that he thinks that this is going to be a trade war that's going to go on for the foreseeable future. Jose?
John, Aaron talking about mixed messages coming out of the White House. Here's what Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick struck and what he said this weekend about the economy writ large. Take a listen to this.
Should Americans brace for a recession?
Absolutely not. There's going to be no recession in America. I would never bet on recession. No chance.
John, totally different tone than what the president said in Gaggle on Air Force One. How do you see it?
Well, Jose, it would be really great if we could get our story right? What is it? What is it going to be? By the way, we've tried tariffs before in our country, and guess what? They never brought good things. They did not be able to restore America's wealth. What I will say, Jose, is that I think you and I kind of see things the same way. If you're giving me the shaft, if you're selling me products for lower than what it costs you to make them. That's called dumping. We're not going for that. We're going to try to address that. And whoever it was from Europe that made the comment that rather than just willy-nilly imposing these tariffs, why don't we sit down and figure out what's best for both countries? And that's what ought to happen. And in addition, of course, it would be great if we could be truly aligned with the EU, with the European nations, against some of the ripoffs that China has done to our country. So I think, it's not about just put tariffs on and protect your industries and all that. That leads to nothing but trouble, higher prices. It will hurt consumers. It will hurt our economy. On the other hand, there are legitimate grounds on which to negotiate, and that's the way we should pursue it. But make no mistake about it. Higher tariffs mean higher prices. Higher tariffs mean taxes.
Yeah, I mean, Brian, this comes as the president floated the possibility of more tariffs on Canadian dairy and lumber. What impact would that have on us?
Yeah, and by the way, the president teased that as something that could happen over the weekend or today. Haven't seen anything yet, so it remains to be seen exactly what he means by that. But we're talking about two things when it comes to dairy and lumber. Dairy is a major export market for United States producers. Canada has higher tariffs than reciprocally are applied to Canadian dairy that's imported into the United States because Canada wants to protect their dairy producers. But what we're talking about with lumber is a pretty substantial thing because that is such a major and I think by volume, larger trade item between the two countries. Softwood lumber comes a lot from Mexico and Canada when we're talking about what we have here in the United States. It is a major export market for Canada. And actually, there are some estimates out there from the National Association of Home Builders that a tariff that's applied to lumber, which it's not right now, given what we saw as the exemptions under USMCA applied to Canada last week. But the National Association of Home Builders is estimating that a tariff on lumber could increase the cost of a new home by, get this, $7,500 to $10,000, speaking to what the governor was saying about some of these costs getting passed on to home buyers in a market where the mortgage rates are already super high. That's certainly probably not a welcome development.
Yeah, I mean, Governor, the tariffs are not only issuing or are not facing just, farmers, for example. We're talking about lumber and dairy and all the things. But according to 2021 data, USAID sources 41% of food for its aid programs around the world from American farmers directly. This could have an impact there.
Well, especially soybeans. Jose, look, what farmers like to do is to rotate their crops so they don't end up like the Dust Bowl. That's exactly what rotation is. And USAID has helped the United States to plan, help the farmers in the United States to plan, for example, the sale of soybeans overseas. But what's happening, Jose, you're beginning to see the pushback. You had a fight between Rubio and Musk. You've now had an argument going on between the head of the FAA and Musk. And I think, Jose, what's beginning to happen is once you get put in charge of a particular program, like you're the cabinet head, and you got somebody else coming in and trying to tell you what to do, you don't like it, particularly if they don't understand what it is that goes on inside of your department. And I must say, this business of just firing people across the government, I don't believe that's the way to try to deal with the size and scope of government. I've had to deal with it as the governor, and I'll tell you what I did. I just didn't replace people once they retired. But where is the joy and the sense in just having somebody go home and say, I lost my job today, and when they say, well, why'd you lose it? You say, I don't have any idea. It's some philosophy of trying to just get rid of people. That is not the way to do that, particularly when we're going to see the growth of probably as much as $2 trillion in additional debt because they can't figure out how to engineer their operation to both have tax cuts and figure out how to downsize things in a smart way. So what we're going to do is we're just going to fire a bunch of people and feel good about that? I don't buy it. I don't think it makes any sense. And you're beginning to see the cabinet members inside the administration push back and say that is not what you should be doing to my department.